Welcome, everybody, to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, we talk about four pillars of freedom: time, financial, location, and health. And so today we're going to talk about neuro optimization, Karlyn Fischer. And I'll let her introduce herself, but she's a passionate speaker. She's expert on nervous system calibration, and would talk about how she uses these concepts to transform her client's life. So, Karlyn, welcome.
Thank you very much. But yeah, I love the idea behind the four pillars, and I think they make so much sense. Like you talked about, like they go hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other. So, what I like to teach my clients is a little bit about how to engineer your mind to calibrate it to reach your goals, because what they don't teach you is there's certain processing systems that either choose this way or choose this way, or we can dive into a little bit more, but neuroplasticity actually blows my mind. I think it's one of the most profound, underrated things. And it's something that we don't talk about every day. But if you look at even your four pillars, it's like, okay, how do we apply that to what we're doing so we can just keep optimizing ourselves and kind of checking in? Because sure, some people can do it, but if you add that extra awareness around your mind and your nervous system and how they impact who you are every day, that's the thing that helps you reach your goals. And that's the thing that you can always be better, that people don't get. You can always be better. You can always optimize yourself that little bit more to get that extra edge.
That's interesting. And how did you come into this field? Was it something you did during grad school, or how did you come into this?
When I was in engineering school, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, and I used to play with my fight or flight a lot. And I was one of those kids that had like very strong willpower, and I could make myself study for 16 hours, like straight. I could like do all these little things that they told you to do, or do all these little overachievery things, because that's what I was. But over time, it was like one of my links in my body got run down. And then I kind of started to realize later on, I went to yoga school and started taking different courses and started understanding the system. And I started to understand how, even though you're an overachiever, there's ways to work long hours, there's ways to do long things without actually putting yourself into that fight or flight position, because we can go a little bit more in depth into it later. But essentially, when you're doing that, you're telling your cells what's next. And when you tell your cells that we are running from this threat and it doesn't exist, and you're staying worried while you work on a project for 16 hours, like you are depleting your energy source. And a lot of what engineering is, it's taking your energy in and your energy out. It's creating systems around machines, it's taking systems around water, it's just all these systems. So in my head, I'm like, after I started to understand this and realize this, there's a way to do it that is engineering. It's engineering your mind, it's reprogramming it to essentially be the person that you want to do the thing that you want, whether you're looking at finances, like whether you're a trader, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a CEO or entrepreneur. Like there's ways to give you that extra edge that's an actual system that we aren't utilizing today.
Interesting. And what are some examples of systems that you use? You describe systems around water, and I'm curious, like, just you don't have to go into everything, but kind of some examples.
Okay. So, one, I think that's a system in engineering, which I think is interesting, is in engineering, you look at flood control. And as you do flood control, I always thought it would be interesting in that we look at flood zone to reroute them. I thought if you wanted to build your house, you just build it wherever you want. And in engineering, we'd say, oh, this is in a flood zone. Like, what do we need to do to build around this? Like, let's build some sort of waterway system so that I can have my house here. But funny enough, in engineering, they don't do that. They don't build houses in this level of flood zone. And the only reason they don't is because they said Mother Nature will always win. And which I thought was interesting, because I was like, well, engineering, aren't we supposed to outsmart it and do something? And they're like, no, over time, that little pathway, like if you look at a river, how it slowly collects water, it's going to win. So you can build your house there, but over time, it's your system's going to get, because you can't win against like mountains and Mother Nature. But if you apply that same concept to your mind and you look at even neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to sculpt itself or shape itself from a structural level. So if you look at neuroplasticity like tire tracks or ruts in the mud, and if you've ever driven down a muddy road when there's tires, 8 people have driven down that road before you. You'll naturally go right where their tire tracks are. And if you try to get out of it, your wheel wells will just take you back down that road and you'll kind of keep following it. Or like a riverbed, it kind of collects water and you slope in. So your mind is essentially creating a little path. And once it forms one, it will keep going down that same path. And it likes to choose the path of least resistance because it's high functioning. So if you understand that your mind, once it focuses on something and it builds that connection, then you can kind of keep going from that frame point. But the thing is that if you don't understand that, you think of what you focus on as random, and then you start building pathways in random directions, and then you don't know. Like, for example, when I was 19, I didn't know that. And all I knew was from going from high school to college, I used to get like 95s or something like that, right? And then you're with all these 5% of the smartest kids that all come together, and then it's a different ball game, and then they give you an extra class than every other college student has. So you went from your pathways where, hey, I get everything I ever learned, right? I'm pretty good at this. I kind of will maybe have to study, but not the same, to being overwhelmed over here, but you have more pathways for the one than you do for the other. So when you put someone in that situation, they're naturally going to panic and they're naturally going to stress. But what you do over time to that person is, if you don't like utilize your stress, is I built pathways for stress. I built pathways to like turn on my fight or flight. Or when I'm studying in that framework, I would be really stressed about it while I was studying. But as you get really stressed about it while you're doing that thing, it's not helping you long term because you're depleting your resources while you're doing it. It's the same with some of your clients with like finance, right? Like if you think about how you don't have money for hours and hours and hours, that's not helping you get money because you're not turning on the center you need to go get money or find money or utilize like something outside of you to find it, right? Because there's a lot of times where you get put in a situation where you can either one, decide, hey, I have nothing, I can't do anything, or one where you just find an opportunity, but that's all like a switch in your mind that gets to decide what to see.
Right. Oh, interesting. And when what's interesting is you talked about being able to function for 16 hours straight. What's going through your mind as you do that?
As you do that, I
Yeah.
think a little bit of adrenaline, right? Like when you're a college kid, you're like, okay, if I don't do this, I'm gonna fail. And when you're 19 and you're used to being like that person, you don't fail, right? Like you just don't, and you don't see failure as like an iteration, or you don't reframe fail, you just have never failed, right? So then when you go here and it's different, you kind of activate your fight or flight, like you have your adrenaline and your cortisol, so you're, I call it as almost like you're borrowing energy, right? Like you're utilizing energy that you have later, and then you try to go sleep, you can't really sleep, or you just can kind of find like the willpower to make yourself like sit there, like wake up at like 7 a.m. and study and then keep going throughout the day. And you might eat or do something, but you're pretty much like, do I want to go take a break? No, like it's just kind of you sit down and keep going and keep going. But you're essentially utilizing like that fight or flight resources to keep you there. And it's like the fear of your mind of the outcome that's keeping you in that spot right there. But if you do that for like days on days on days, where you're just like worried and you're not optimizing your mind, you're borrowing resources over time. Or if you look at people where they go to like 4 meetings back to back to back and they're stressed about making them all, or they have all these deadlines or they overbook themselves, they're staying in their fight or flight all day. And essentially, when they get off work, they're exhausted.
Interesting. And what is this idea of this nervous system calibration that you talk about? Because I know one of my colleagues and friends, she's actually a career coach as well, and she's talking about ways of calming the nervous system. Describe this to me because it's an interesting idea.
Sure. So your nervous system is kind of cool because like you don't have a, like people talk about mind, body, and yoga, and some people are like, oh, that doesn't exist. but like you don't have a floating head, right? Like your mind connects to your body through your nervous system, and your nervous system is essentially sending the responses to your body.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always connected. There's always, from your thoughts, there's always something telling your body what to do, right? But what they know is that you get addicted to your own emotions, and it's from this script, and your nervous system cues up these emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So with this script that your nervous system does, it decides to be in a couple different frameworks. So it's like fight or flight, freeze, fawn, or rest or digest. And most of your day, you want to be in rest or digest. You want to just be like sitting down, doing the tasks you have. You might have like a little stress point that's like, oh, you have a deadline. And you're like, oh, okay, I better do this. Like little stressors are okay. But when you stay in big stressors, what you're doing to your nervous system is you're overriding it, and then it stays in that state. So if you ever talk to someone and they say, I can't meditate, it's because their nervous system's so jacked up that they can't sit there. So it actually is like a reverse thing because they're addicted to that high of the adrenaline and the cortisol, and they can't sit still in that moment. So you have to reset their nervous system a little bit, because you can't just tell their mind to calm down because their nervous system is too addicted to that stress point. So you have to do a little bit of calibration with them to help reset it and reframe it. But essentially, it is interesting because they talk about like your external environment and how, say, for example, you work with someone in finances and they're always stressed about something, right? They just always find something, and you're like, how did you find something to be stressed about? We just finished this thing and you already found that next like stressor instant. What happens is when you're addicted to your emotions, you're looking for an external thing that matches the way you want to feel. So you don't mean to, but even on the way to work, when people have road rage, then they kind of get that little bit. And some of it is like they like their adrenaline, or some people like the adrenaline burst of almost being late because it gives them that something. Like, really, they say they don't mean to, but it's that little adrenaline that they kind of, their body is used to. And they might not be like, yeah, I love doing that, but there's some little addiction there. And then even when people go home from work and they have like a glass of wine and they watch their show, and if their show is like dramatic or it has a lot of like in it, then they're almost like addicted to that stress response, and then they wake up and do the same thing over again. But what you kind of want to do is you want to calibrate that nervous system to do what you want to do, and you want to be very aware of which state you're in and how long you're in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, like say you didn't leave on time and you have something and you know you're going to be late. Like you're like, oh, 3 minutes late, and you're like, oh, I could drive faster, I could do this. But if you stay in fight or flight for 30 minutes before that meeting, when you know you have to drive there, and you kind of know, right? Essentially, like, I might be 2 minutes late for this thing. You know, and you could accept it. You could probably message someone. You could do something instead of just being like, oh, I'm going to be stressed about this for the next 30 minutes because I can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because like once you kind of stop that little thing, it can impact your 8 hour day, and then it can impact you later, and keep going and keep going. But like, even from a finance point, like people might not mean to, but you might be addicted to the time when you don't have a lot of money in your account, right? Like you can kind of get little nervous system addictions to things like that. You might not want it, but something of that little addiction is your body's script and it's used to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been an interesting conversation. I like this idea of neuroplasticity, and then calibrating, and then managing your nervous system, which is really interesting. And I know a lot of the audience would be interested in following you. I know you have a YouTube channel and website. How can they follow you and connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. So if you are interested in learning more about how to set your nervous system, how to apply neuroplasticity to what you're doing, or even how to actually meditate instead of just giving it a try and saying it's not for me, I have a website, which I'm sure he'll share with you. And then I'm new to YouTube, but I'm really active on LinkedIn. So if you want to reach me one of those ways and just learn a couple tools to recalibrate yourself, because there definitely is a system and a framework that it follows. It's not random, but it's, if you know that system, you can utilize it for you, or you can do nothing and it can just be utilized randomly against you.
And for the audience out there, Karlyn's resources will be in the links and show notes. So thanks so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. I'm always interested in these new ideas, and so thanks for expanding on that. And for all the audience, check out Karlyn's LinkedIn and YouTube and website. So thanks so much, and we look forward to hearing about your future success.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun chatting.